David and Goliath. The full story explained Part 1, the battle that changed history. Have you ever wondered how a young shepherd with nothing more than a sling defeated one of the most feared warriors in history? For thousands of years, the story of David and Goliath has inspired people around the world. Many know it as the story of a boy defeating a giant. But the true story is far greater than that. It is a story of fear and courage, faith and doubt, and how one ordinary person trusted God when an entire army would not. Today, we're going to explore the complete story of David and Goliath, beginning long before the famous battle ever took place. We'll look at the historical setting, the people involved, and the events that led to one of the most well-known moments in the Bible. This story takes place during the reign of King Saul, the first king of Israel. Although Saul had once been chosen by God to lead the nation, things had begun to change. Saul had repeatedly disobeyed God's commands, and because of his disobedience, God declared that another king would one day replace him. While Saul still sat on Israel's throne, God had already chosen the young shepherd David to become Israel's future king. At this point, however, almost no one knew who David was. He wasn't a famous warrior or an important leader. He spent his days caring for his father's sheep in the hills near Bethlehem. At the same time, Israel faced one of its greatest enemies, the Philistines. The Philistines were a powerful people who lived along the Mediterranean coast. They were skilled soldiers, experienced in battle, and equipped with advanced weapons made from iron. Their armies had fought Israel many times before, and every battle threatened the safety and future of God's people. Eventually, the Philistine army gathered for another confrontation. The Israelites marched out to meet them, and the two armies camped on opposite sides of a wide valley known as the Valley of Elah. For days, neither side attacked. Instead, both armies stood watching one another from across the valley, waiting to see who would make the first move. But then something unexpected happened. Rather than beginning a full battle, the Philistines sent out their greatest champion. His name was Goliath. Goliath came from the city of Gath and was known throughout the land for his incredible size and strength. The Bible describes him as standing over 9 feet tall according to some traditional translations, though scholars have discussed different ways of understanding the ancient measurements. Regardless of the exact height, the message is clear. Goliath was an enormous and intimidating warrior. His bronze armor weighed far more than what many soldiers could comfortably carry. He wore a massive bronze helmet and body armor, carried a huge spear, and marched confidently into the valley as if no one could possibly defeat him. From the moment he stepped forward, the atmosphere changed. The soldiers of Israel looked across the valley and saw a man unlike anyone they had ever faced before. Fear spread through the camp. No one knew who could possibly stand against such a powerful warrior. And every day, that fear would continue to grow. Part 2, Goliath's Challenge. Every morning, as the sun rose over the Valley of Elah, the soldiers of Israel prepared themselves for battle. But instead of charging into combat, they waited. Then, from the Philistine camp, a single figure would emerge. It was Goliath. With every step, his heavy armor echoed across the valley. His bronze helmet gleamed beneath the sunlight, and the enormous spear in his hand reminded everyone why he was considered the Philistines' greatest champion. But Goliath wasn't there simply to fight. He came to challenge an entire nation. Standing between the two armies, he shouted for all of Israel to hear. Instead of sending thousands of soldiers into battle, Goliath proposed a different solution. Choose one man to fight me. If he defeats me, the Philistines will become your servants. But if I defeat him, you will serve us. This was known as representative combat, a practice sometimes used in the ancient world where two champions fought on behalf of their armies. To Goliath, it seemed like the perfect plan. He believed no one in Israel could defeat him. Day after day, he repeated the same challenge. Morning after morning, evening after evening. For 40 days, Goliath stepped into the valley and mocked the armies of Israel. He mocked their soldiers. He mocked their king. Most of all, he mocked the God they served. Every insult echoed through the valley, but no one answered. King Saul listened from his camp. His commanders listened. Thousands of trained soldiers listened. Yet no one stepped forward. The Bible tells us that Saul and all Israel were terrified. The fear wasn't simply because Goliath was large. He was a professional warrior who had trained for battle from his youth. His armor offered tremendous protection, His weapons were larger and heavier than those carried by ordinary soldiers. From a human perspective, defeating him seemed impossible. The Israelite army slowly lost confidence. Each day that passed without anyone accepting Goliath's challenge only made the Philistines more confident and Israel more discouraged. Meanwhile, many miles away in Bethlehem, David knew almost nothing about what was happening. He wasn't living at the battlefield. He wasn't training as a soldier. Instead, he continued doing the same work he had always done. Every day, David cared for his father's sheep. He guided them to fresh grass. He searched for clean water. He protected them from danger. To most people, it seemed like an ordinary life. But those quiet years in the fields were preparing David for something far greater. While watching over his flock, David learned responsibility. He learned patience. He learned courage. Most importantly, he learned to trust God even when no one else was watching. The lonely hills outside Bethlehem became David's classroom. As he watched the sheep, he spent countless hours praying, thinking, and praising God. Many believe that during these years David wrote some of the beautiful songs that would later become part of the book of Psalms. He wasn't preparing to become famous. He wasn't trying to become a hero. He was simply being faithful in the work God had already given him. Soon, that faithfulness would lead him from the quiet pastures of Bethlehem to the battlefield of the Valley of Elah. And everything was about to change. Part 3. The shepherd arrives at the battlefield. While the armies of Israel remained camped in the Valley of Elah, life continued back in Bethlehem. David's 3 oldest brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, had joined King Saul's army. But David was not a soldier. He continued caring for his father Jesus' sheep, traveling between Bethlehem and Saul's court when needed and faithfully tending the flock. One morning, Jesus called David. He gave him roasted grain, bread, and cheese and asked him to take the food to his brothers at the battlefield. Jesus also wanted David to find out how they were doing and bring back news of the army. It seemed like a simple errand. David had no idea that this ordinary trip would change his life forever. Early the next morning, David left the sheep with another shepherd and began the journey to the Valley of Elah. As he approached the camp, the sounds of soldiers filled the air. Trumpets echoed across the valley. Men prepared their weapons. Voices rose as both armies took their positions on opposite hillsides. David quickly delivered the supplies to the keeper of the baggage and hurried to find his brothers. As he greeted them, a familiar sound echoed across the valley. From the Philistine camp, Goliath stepped forward once again. His booming voice carried over the battlefield. He challenged Israel exactly as he had done every day for 40 days, mocking the army and insulting the God of Israel. Immediately, the Israelite soldiers reacted as they always had. Fear spread through the camp. Many stepped back. Others turned away. No one accepted the challenge. But David's response was completely different. Instead of focusing on Goliath's size, David focused on Goliath's words. He couldn't believe that someone would openly mock the living God while God's people stood silent. David turned to the nearby soldiers and asked, "What will be done for the man who defeats this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel?" The soldiers explained that King Saul had offered a great reward. The man who defeated Goliath would receive great wealth. He would be allowed to marry one of the king's daughters. His father's family would also be freed from paying taxes in Israel. But David wasn't interested in the reward. His concern was much deeper. He asked another question that revealed his heart. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David saw something that many others had forgotten. This battle was not simply Israel versus the Philistines. It was about whether God's people would trust him. As David continued speaking, his oldest brother Eliab overheard the conversation. Instead of encouraging David, Eliab became angry. He accused David of being proud and questioned why he had even come to the battlefield. He assumed David had only come to watch the fighting. David calmly replied, "What have I done now? Can't I even ask a question?" Rather than arguing, David walked away and continued asking others about Goliath and the king's reward. Before long, word spread throughout the camp. The young shepherd who had just arrived wasn't afraid of the giant. Eventually, the news reached King Saul himself. Curious about this unexpected visitor, Saul ordered that David be brought before him. No one in the camp could have imagined what would happen next. The shepherd who had come only to deliver food was about to stand before the king of Israel. and volunteer to face the most feared warrior in the land. Final part. The words David had spoken quickly spread throughout the Israelite camp. Before long, King Saul heard that a young shepherd believed someone could stand against Goliath. Curious, Saul ordered that David be brought before him. David entered the king's tent wearing the same simple shepherd's clothes he had traveled in from Bethlehem. Around him stood experienced commanders and hardened soldiers, yet it was the youngest person in the room who appeared the most confident. Saul looked at David and immediately saw a problem. "You are not able to fight this Philistine," Saul said. "You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior since his youth." From a human perspective, Saul's concern made perfect sense. Goliath was a trained soldier covered from head to toe in heavy bronze armor. David had never served in the army and carried no sword or spear. But David's confidence did not come from military experience. It came from remembering what God had already done. Respectfully, David answered the king, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried away one of the sheep, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. If it turned against me, I grabbed it, struck it, and killed it." The men inside the tent listened in silence. David continued, "I have faced both lions and bears, and this Philistine will be like one of them, because he has challenged the armies of the living God." Then David spoke the words that revealed where his confidence truly came from. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." For a moment, the tent became completely quiet. Saul looked at the young shepherd standing before him. David showed no fear, no hesitation, only complete trust in God. Finally, Saul nodded. "Go," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." Before David left, Saul attempted to prepare him for battle. The king ordered his own armor to be brought. Soldiers carefully placed the heavy bronze helmet on David's head. They fastened the armor around his chest and handed him the king's sword. David tried to walk. The armor was far too heavy. Every movement felt awkward and uncomfortable. He had never trained while wearing equipment like this. After taking only a few steps, David stopped. "I cannot fight in these," he said. "I am not used to them." So David removed the helmet. He removed the armor. He laid down the sword. Instead of trusting weapons that belonged to someone else, David chose to fight with the tools God had already placed in his hands. Taking only his shepherd's staff, his sling, and a small shepherd's bag, David left the camp and walked toward a nearby stream. There he knelt beside the flowing water. Carefully, he searched among the stones until he found 5 smooth stones. One by one, he placed them into his shepherd's pouch. No one watching could understand what David was doing. Experienced soldiers carried shields, swords, spears, and armor. David carried only a sling and 5 stones. Yet David believed that victory would not be decided by the size of a weapon. Victory belonged to God. With everything prepared, David stood. He tightened the strap of his shepherd's bag across his shoulder and gripped his wooden staff. Then, without turning back, the young shepherd began walking down the hillside toward the Valley of Elah. Across the valley, Goliath was waiting. The battle that generations would remember was finally about to begin. As David walked into the Valley of Elah, every eye was fixed upon him. The Israelite soldiers watched from one hillside. The Philistine army watched from the other. Between them stood Goliath, the giant warrior who had challenged Israel for 40 days. When Goliath finally saw who was approaching, he stopped. At first, he could hardly believe what he was seeing. Instead of an experienced soldier wearing armor, a young shepherd carrying only a staff, a sling, and a small pouch walked confidently toward him. Goliath laughed. Looking down at David, he mocked him and said, "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" Then the giant cursed David and called for him to come closer. "Come here," Goliath shouted. "I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild animals." The valley fell silent. Everyone waited to hear how the young shepherd would respond. David did not run. He did not hesitate. Instead, he answered with confidence, "You come against me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." He continued, "Today the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." David wanted everyone to understand an important truth. Victory would not come because he was stronger than Goliath. Victory would come because God was greater than any giant. Then everything happened at once. Goliath began moving forward. David ran toward him. While running, David reached into his shepherd's pouch and pulled out one smooth stone. He placed it into his sling. With practice, skill developed during countless days protecting sheep, David swung the sling above his head. The stone flew through the air with incredible speed. It struck Goliath in the forehead. The giant staggered. Then, before the eyes of both armies, Goliath fell face down onto the ground. For a brief moment, the entire battlefield became completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The champion of the Philistines had been defeated. David immediately ran to Goliath. Because he carried no sword of his own, he took Goliath's sword and used it to ensure the battle was over. When the Philistine army saw that their champion had fallen, fear spread through their ranks. The same army that had terrified Israel now turned and fled. The Israelites shouted with joy and charged across the valley. They pursued the Philistines, winning a great victory that day. What had seemed impossible only moments before had become reality. News of David's victory spread throughout Israel. The unknown shepherd from Bethlehem was now known across the nation. But the story of David and Goliath is about much more than one battle. It reminds us that fear often grows when we focus only on the size of the problem before us. The soldiers of Israel saw only Goliath's strength. David saw God's power. Everyone else measured the giant by human standards. David measured him against the greatness of God. David also teaches us that faith is often built long before life's greatest challenges arrive. The courage he showed in the valley did not appear overnight. It had been developed through years of faithfully caring for sheep, trusting God in quiet places where no one else was watching. Those ordinary days prepared him for an extraordinary moment. The same principle is true today. Many of the challenges we face may seem overwhelming. Sometimes our problems appear too large to overcome. But the story of David reminds us that no obstacle is greater than God. Faith does not mean pretending problems are small. Faith means believing that God is greater. For more than 3,000 years, this story has encouraged millions of people around the world. Not because David was the strongest person on the battlefield, but because he trusted the one who was. Thank you for watching Bible Explained. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more complete Bible stories explained, consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey through Scripture. Until next time, thank you for watching, and God bless.